Hey guys, I'm here super happy on the How They Did It podcast with Scott Stevenson. So you might have seen him from Fortitude Training. He has a very cool training style. That's what I'm talking about. Cluster sets. I actually bought your book
Oh, cool.
like 3 to 4 years ago. It was COVID time. So we didn't have a lot of equipment. I was getting bored out of my mind with I had one kettlebell and like a couple dumbbells, and I was just trying to make it work. And I bought your training and to kind of try to use those cluster sets and try to use those intensity and do muscle rounds and things like that to spice up my training. And I loved it. I got a bunch of games. It kept me in the gym like an extra 2 months while we were locked down in Europe, especially. We were really locked down. So it was great, and I've used it with my clients ever since then. And I'm a big fan, and I love watching all your podcast stuff. So thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome, man. If I cut out, you're a little, I can still hear you, but the connection's a little bit quirky. So, it's interesting because I was trapped for I think 12, maybe I was trapped for 16 days, and now you're totally frozen. So hopefully you can hear me. Am I coming through?
Don't worry. The podcast will actually, even if it freezes, it keeps recording.
It'll correct. Okay, cool. Just make sure. And I was on my way home. It was right when COVID struck. This is all sort of documented on Instagram. And I just had my backpack with bands in it, my gym backpack, and I throw bands on stuff into the gyms, but nothing was open. I just trained in a field for over 2 weeks. I just went out and there was this big heavy ass pipe that I did bent over rows with. I mean, the thing was 20 feet long, right? It probably weighed 250, 300 pounds at the end. And I figured out how to do squats, but I was doing a Fortitude Training based regime. That was sort of the training pattern that I was following, but you can get super creative. And that was one of the beautiful things, you look at COVID overall, what was beautiful, but people learned that you can actually create an incredibly effective training stimulus by being really creative and getting outside of the box. And people were forced to do that. If they wanted to train, they had to get outside the box, right? Because there was no box to go to, right? The boxes were closed. So you had to do this sort of stuff, especially during the pandemic.
100%. And I feel like as a coach, it made me a better coach as well, because having the limitations put on me made me really have to focus on a level of creativity. I had to be able to say, okay, what actually is going to be working? What's important? What can I get out of this training session to the maximum ability?
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to do that with limited equipment. And I did it for myself and for my clients. I was training my clients through the entire time. I remember at times I was even sneaking around. The police basically wouldn't let you out of your house. And I was working for my clients, and they were in Monaco, and my house actually in France. And I was walking around cops, trying to avoid them to get there to go to the police office, to pass the police to get to their house so I could do it without getting fined every day. It was hilarious.
Wow. That's hilarious.
Dedicated work. Scott, I wanted to actually walk into this. First thing I wanted to go into, I've heard a couple of your ideas about the mental side of training, and what has changed. What have you been thinking about? What kind of philosophies? And I've heard you talk about this in other podcasts before. I actually heard a podcast recently with one of our old podcast guests, Steve Hall. Was an excellent. You guys did an excellent job. And you guys were talking about some of the mindset shifts in training and stuff. Can you expand for my audience here on some ways you think people should be considering what their mindset should be towards training, towards dieting, towards these things, and ways to help them improve to get to their goals and overcome some difficulties?
Yeah. So it's funny because this topic is how I wanted to approach or enter into the idea of GLP-1 agonists, things that are now adjuncts, very, very frequently used. Seems like this is, if there's anything in terms of worldwide prescriptions of those drugs and use of those drugs, it's absolutely amazing, because they can be a tremendous crutch. So in that context, and to answer your question more directly, The thing that we don't often realize, this is from my perspective, is that most people listening to this are in a first world position. We don't have the types of challenges that we would have had 100 years ago or 200 years ago. There's no running water, there's no electricity. Life was a very, very different this time. Now, these days, now we have different types of injuries, traumas. There's a whole different set of circumstances. But one thing we can avoid quite easily are challenges in our life that build resilience. It's very easy to go through life as someone living in a first world country who's not living in poverty, let's say, and not have physical challenges, not develop that mental fortitude. And this is the reason, partly why I chose to name my training system Fortitude Training, is because what comes along with bodybuilding resistance training, when you basically put a challenge in front of yourself, is a stress that you then can rise to. So obviously we talk about adaptation, skeletal muscle growth, progressive overload, general adaptation syndrome, all those sorts of things from a physiological perspective. But psychologically, the idea, and this is what happens with sports in general, that I think gets lost unless you like dug into the ethics of sports and the sports philosophy area, is that the point there is to build an overall sort of resilience, an overall strength that they can then be applied elsewhere in your life. And it's really to be in the place where you can afford to do something like, I'm going to challenge myself to diet down and eat just enough to hold on to muscle mass, literally, quote unquote, feel like I'm starving for months on end, to create this challenge during which you gain perspective on how good you have it otherwise in your life. That we can do this, that life just doesn't impose those things upon you, is really a blessing. It's really, really quite incredible that we can do this stuff. And I think there's some part, like this is variable amongst humans, there are those people who are sort of maybe thrill seekers, challenge seekers. This may even have something to do with, for instance, dopamine receptor phenotypes that people have in terms of what amount of stimulus and novelty that they need in their life in terms of taking on challenges. Some people want to jump off mountains and jump out of planes and climb mountains, jump out of planes, do bungee jumping. They need challenges, they need stimulus, they need to go on road trips, they need to be different places. Other people are very happy just to sit at home, have a very simple, predictable life. But life would impose these challenges on us, and from those challenges, we become better people, potentially. And and this is my take on it, and I shoot myself in the foot as a coach, and it's connected to many things involved with bodybuilding in the modern environment that we have, is that the more you relieve that stress by, for instance, taking on a coach who's going to tell you what to do, so you don't have to figure out things when you're in a stressful situation, right? Imagine you've got a stressful workplace, you've got stress at home, you need to figure out how to stay cool, calm, and collected, not have hypertension because you're so stressed out, know how to not have an outburst when someone asks you, like for the 4,000th time that week, this stupid question that you're just getting so pissed off about. All those things that stress us out in life are things that we're gonna face, and bodybuilding gives us a chance when we're under that pressure cooker of having to make the calls, like, okay, so what am I going to do with my diet? Do I give myself the refeed? Do I not give myself the refeed? Am I being OCD? Like, no refeeds, you can't do that, you're not going to be in shape. But it makes sense because the refeeds seem to be evoking the effect and fat loss that I'm looking for. I need those in there along my journey. You got to make that call. That's a stressful call to make. When you take that cognitive challenge and hand that over to a coach, right? When you haven't, and this is the caveat there, when you haven't done everything in your power, and now you're like, okay, I'm really not sure what to do, right? I've done my absolute best. Now I need the coach to help me get better. That makes sense to me. But if this is something, everyone's different. Everyone does people do bodybuilding for different reasons. But if the consideration I'm posing here is, if you just take those challenges and hand them off to someone to make things easier on yourself, you miss the opportunity to find your way over that hurdle and become better. So then when things are difficult at work, in those other situations in your life, you're like, this ain't shit compared to what I went through, from my bodybuilding. Life's easy when I'm not prepping. Prepping makes me better. And then at some point in time, prepping becomes somewhat of a breeze and everything is lightened. It's just like exercise training. If you get used to picking up very, very heavy things, there's hardly anything that you'll come across in your life unless like you're intentionally like trying to put bumpers on your car by yourself or do things that take three people to do, you're doing yourself. You won't have anything that's heavy. Everything is relatively easier when you're physically trained. That's the nature of the training adaptation. There's a psychological training adaptation that can happen with bodybuilding in particular because it's such a psychological demand. So that's kind of where I see it, and I don't see that mentioned that often. And it, like I said, it does. The purpose of the coach is to lighten the psychological load, right? And
Yeah.
so I shoot myself in the foot, because I don't take people on. I did this for years, where I tell them X, Y, and Z what to do. If someone is like, I've learned all I can possibly learn. My life situation is I don't have a degree in exercise science. I don't know how to read the research. I'm an expert in another area, what have you. I need you at this point. I've done all I can do. I'm changing the oil on my car. I'm checking my fluids. I'm making sure my tires are full. I'm looking at alignment issues, but I don't know a damn thing about carburetors. I'm going to need to go a mechanic. Then that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But if you're immediately just saying, I don't know anything about my car, just make it drive, well, then you're dependent upon that. And you won't be able to, for instance, if you like run out of, this is a crazy example, you run out of gas and you're completely oblivious to the fact that your car needs to have gas, it's like, then you're shit out of luck, right? If your oil starts getting low and you don't even know where to fill the oil, right? Or, you're 5,000 miles past your oil and filter change and you don't know how to do that, well, then you're dependent upon someone. And that's a dependency that can reduce quality of life, I think. And there's a sense of efficacy and self-actualization when you're the person who's behind the steering wheel of your own life. So those life challenges aren't the things that get you down. And there was I believe it was a Zen koan or a Buddhist saying that I came across a few weeks ago that it stuck in my head that I really like. And it was something along the lines of the bird sitting on the branch isn't concerned that the branch might break.
Yeah.
Because the bird can fly. Like
Exactly.
the branch breaks, I just fly away.
Yeah.
But if you, for instance, let's say you're trying to diet or you're in an off-season mode or a period where you don't have a coach and you've never learned to fly on your own, you're stressed. Like what happens? Like what am I going to do next? What happens if I start to gain weight or I go on vacation? I have all this weight I gained. I don't know how to get it off because you've never done that. It's a simple thing, right? It's like cut your calories, what have you. There's numerous ways that can happen. People know these things in an objective black and white way, but the psychological burden of applying that to themselves is something they haven't taken on. So they're like that bird that can't fly is like, I'm shit out. If this branch breaks, I'm on the ground and I'm fucked. Pardon my French, right?
French is allowed.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, you speak French, so you can check me if my French gets out of line.
I actually don't speak French. I just stay in France a lot.
Okay, right. So yeah, those are some thoughts to kind of open it up. I said a lot there, so but I think that's what you're getting at.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I kind of do it like this because a lot of people come to me early stages, and I'm actually, I think on the internet, sometimes in like the microcosm that we are in the fitness world, we believe that people are kind of know the basics. My experience in the real world is that they don't. Like, I had a client yesterday that I was telling him that, he needs to increase his vegetable consumption. And he told me, great, I got artichoke. The next day I see his calories, he put the food log, and he didn't know how to find artichoke. He put artichoke and spinach dip inside of ham and rolled it up and ate like 100 of them. And I was like, you've eaten like, whatever, like, I don't even know how many, it was like 3,000 plus calories of this. He's like, but why? You told me to eat more spinach and vegetables. And I'm like, yeah, but it's with dip. He's like, yeah, but spinach is gross. It's like, you're supposed to eat it by itself? Like, it was a completely, there wasn't even like, you would think like, there's no way you don't know this. But the man, honestly, and he's a successful guy. He's done a lot of many things in business. Just, he's so siloed off from it. His whole life was never a problem. His mom didn't raise him like that. His dad never considered it. And he just grew up without it being an issue until like at some point he realized his health wasn't going good. His blood sugar was really high. LDL was high blood pressure. And the doctor was like, do something. And then that's how I got in contact with him. And so what I try to do is, in the beginning, I'll really hold their hand to bring them out of the swamp. And then slowly I'll dial things back. Like in the beginning, instead of having them put their food in the calories because that seems like insurmountable to them. Like, oh my God, I got to write everything. Send me a picture of everything you eat. I'll do your calories at the end of the day.
Right.
I did the calories. Slowly, I'm like, okay, now I just want you to enter it in the app. Even if you do it wrong, I'll double check it. Okay, double check it. Then it's like, I'm no longer double checking it anymore. You know how to do it. It's been, we've been doing it for a month. I want to see you do it, and I'm going to read it. If we're not seeing the results, I'm going to go back, and then, we're going to have to deal with the process again. And I'll slowly bring them into it and hopefully build up enough foundation that, okay, even if, I call it the getting hit by a bus method. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, my goal is by the end of our 3 months, whatever it is, I got hit by the bus, you don't, go back to being a diabetic. Like, where, we don't need type 2 diabetes. Lowered your cholesterol, I don't want it back through the roof. So that's the main goal. But I normally take it the opposite, unless I have seen it. I've seen guys come to me and you could tell they just want to get, especially a lot of my clients I worked with in person, they just don't want to think. They just want to come in the gym. They want you to make the decisions for them. They want you, by the way, to also, I think, to blame. I think that's another thing. They want somebody,
That
if
happens.
it doesn't play the way it works, it's your fault, not my fault. I came to you. I don't want to deal with it. And I tell them, I'm like, you're defeating part of the purpose of this. The purpose of this is also to mentally build that, and no pun intended, that fortitude, that, that mental resilience, to do it. So I'm 100% agree with you. And this actually, I agree. This is a great thing to move into the GLP-1s because.
Can I add a couple things there that are important?
Please.
Sorry, you're breaking up really bad, so I don't mean to interrupt you. Apologize. One thing that's important to what you said there, for instance, with this client, and this goes for everyone, when you're in the helping profession, is to start where the person is. So if they don't have an educational background where they know they're not self-starters, so to speak, and they know how to dive into a new area, would do just what you do, right? And start them off at square one, 100%. And the other thing is, and there's a spectrum too. Like, I'll make this short, but there are plenty of clients, and the higher end clients, like they bust their ass to earn their money. They don't want to change. They're not going to change their oil. They don't have time for that. They're coming to you for this service. So they just bring their car in, or they have someone drive. They don't have anything to do with that stuff. And they may have built their resilience elsewhere. So they have it. So that box is checked. They're successful. They're tackling life's challenges. That's not a problem. So they don't need bodybuilding. Bodybuilding for them, or exercise and dieting or recreational bodybuilding, isn't necessary as a tool in order to, it doesn't serve that purpose. It doesn't need to, because they already have that in check. So that's important, I think, to kind of contextualize what I was saying. It's like, it's not that if you hire a coach on who tells you what to do, and you don't use any cognitive energy on figuring out yourself, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That's just one way to go about it. You just realize that there are other things that could be had, which maybe you don't need, because that guy, for instance, really successful, he's already a butt kicker. He doesn't need bodybuilding to make him a better butt kicker, so to speak. He's got that box checked. So anyway, you wanted the transition, I think, into the GLP-1s.
No, actually, this is kind of the one thing I was going to tell you. So I was a professional fighter for many years. I fought in the UFC.
You cut out your professional what?
I was a professional fighter for many years. Fought in
Fighter.
the
Okay. All
UFC.
right.
Yeah. I
Good.
fought in the UFC, and I would fight at 145 pounds. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that weight cut was brutal, very brutal experience.
Yeah.
And when I did it, when I would do it recently, I decided, oh, I'm gonna open this GLP-1 protocol. And somebody I was working with was like, "Have you ever tried GLP-1s yourself? Have you done it?" And I was like, "No, I never felt I needed to." And they said, "Well, if you're gonna do this, you're gonna be coaching people. Shouldn't you try it out to see its effects and understand it firsthand?" And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"That makes sense. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it." So I did a cut with the GLP-1. I thought it was amazing that I was the first time I ever did a diet. I generally was obese as a kid, so I have crazy hunger signaling. My hunger noise is through
Mm-hmm.
the roof. It was the first time in my life I ever felt quiet. I felt like the world quieted down around me. I felt like the volume of the world turned down. And I was like, I wonder how much. Like, would I do that as a fighter today? Would I have taken the GLP-1 to make my weight cuts easier? How would that have affected me as a person? Because I had to persevere through all those weight cuts as that. And I kind of curious, what's your opinion on that for GLP-1 athletes, for fighters, for weight class athletes, whether that, either are bodybuilders. Bodybuilders, I think it's a little more open because a lot of, especially enhanced bodybuilders, are already taking other pharmaceuticals to enhance their physique, but other weight class athletes. Do you have any opinions on this? What do you think about
There's lots of aspects to that. There's many worms in that can, so to speak. The first thing that occurred to me when you were speaking there a little while ago. So I wrestled for a couple years. I told this story for the first time, actually. It hadn't come up for a long while, but I realize now I actually found some old journals, and I found some information about this. So I wrestled in 8th grade, wrestled in I think it was 132, and they let you creep up to 135 because you're a kid, you're growing. And then the next year I had sort of my growth spurt, 9th grade. Now I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. In order just to wrestle junior varsity, I'm wrestling against guys who've been wrestling for their entire lives almost.
it?
And they said, well, if you want to wrestle, you're going to have to wrestle at 127. And I weighed like 150 or 55 or something like that. And then eventually, after a few weeks, like, you'd probably be better trying to get to 122. So I'm like, okay, I don't know any better, right? So what I did, I figured out, like obviously I got to eat less. And my diet was this. I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have a cup of cornflakes with half a cup of skim milk. And that was all the food I ate that day. And then the next day I'd wake up and I'd have an orange because we didn't want to get scurvy from vitamin C deficiency, right? I knew that much apparently. That's what apparently I did. And then the next day I'd have the cornflakes so I was eating about 1,000 calories a week.
Oh my
right?
God.
And I was, wrestling practice is brutal, 2 hours in the closed room to make you sweat more. And I wouldn't drink water during the practice or after practice, like after practice so that I could see what my weight was. I'm going to be able to make weight. And then I would hold off on the water until I got home just because it's mental strengthening. Like I'm like, I got to learn to be in this dehydrated place because I may have to be there for a day. So anyway, like not the healthiest thing at all, like not anything I would suggest. But I realize now, like, it took me decades to realize, like, that was a very formative process. I'm surprised I didn't have just a crazy eating disorder because of that, And bodybuilding is disordered eating anyway. It was one lens you could apply to it. But compared to that, like, every bodybuilding diet was a breeze.
Yeah.
Right? So that fits back with what, you have went through all those cutting diets, and they're all brutal. And then when you had the GLP-1 agonist to help you, like the contrast was so stark there. You could see like, wow, this is entirely different. So there's something formed about those challenges, and GLP-1 releases that. It makes that easier. You won't get that perspective if you always use the GLP-1. You maybe wouldn't be as mentally strong as you are these days. So it's a crutch. It's something that makes things easier. it relieves the stress. So first, probably important to say, is that there are potentially medical consequences. And I'm no expert. Like, I would refer people to Lyle McDonald's book on GLP-1 agonists. He's covered it in exorbitant detail. That's where you're going to find the nitty gritty. But you can run into nutrient deficiencies. There are people that'll just eat like chocolate cake, and nothing else. Like, there's some issues that can happen because the drugs are so powerful, depending on which one you use, and people get various side effects. But there is the possibility, for instance, let's say someone says, I got to make a weight cut in order to make weight, and I know I can do it if I use this GLP-1 agonist because I'll be able to make it through. And that means then that you're going to eat 800 calories for 3 months straight or something that's medically dangerous. Those would allow that to happen, and your body basically isn't registering the danger that's there, which otherwise would. So there's issues with that potentially, and these are extraordinarily powerful drugs. Back in the old days, I think guys probably do this stuff, but bodybuilders are known. People would take meth. I've heard of bodybuilders dieting down on meth because it just ablates your appetite. You go all day long with eating anything, and you're moving around all the time, so you're just burning off calories. And if you're taking enough gear on top of that, you'll hold on to muscle pretty well as long as you train and blah, blah, blah. That's not healthy at all. But you see people will do that, and especially if they're highly motivated like fighters would be, right? You guys are like, we're going to do whatever it takes. So you have the willpower to get there. The other thing, too, that's important, I think is, and there's a book that is one of my it's a really funny book. It's a very wise book. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck is the name of the book.
Mark Manson. Yeah, it's a great book.
Manson, yeah. And I've listened to it once as an audiobook, maybe twice in English, and like 3 times in German. Right? The book's great. And that's one of the things that he says in there is these challenges are one of the things that makes life worthwhile. And we look back, like how many times, like, there was this one day in November of like 89, and it was just a really nice day. I didn't have any stress. I just kind of sat around and, no, you talk about the crazy shit that happened. You talk about the extraordinary life experiences that you had, the difficult ones, and then the afterglow maybe of what happened after those difficult experiences. Like there was a workout. I was doing DC training with Dave Henry, IFBB Pro Dave Henry. People who follow the IFBB probably know who he is. And this is when I was living in Tucson. And we're just doing DC training. We squatted that day, and we just raped the logbook, so to speak. We just destroyed it, kicked ass. And we ended up sort of sitting down, and packing our stuff. And we sat on this bench at the other side of the gym. We both sat there for like over an hour. We were so screwed. Like we were going nowhere. Like it's like, I got to get home, like there's nothing left, just complete, like could have fallen asleep right there in the gym. I remember that, because that was like, we just went after it that particular day. So you introduce GLP-1s, let's say, and the value of the struggle is removed. It becomes easy, right? And related phenomenon you sometimes see in bodybuilders who are extraordinarily gifted, and those who aren't, who really, really want to have a phenomenal physique, and they're highly driven to do this. There's an aesthetic appeal there for whatever reasons. They want to be a really good bodybuilder. And they're really, really jealous of the guys that have the genetics they wish they had. And those guys don't value those genetics. It happens in sports all the time. They don't, people who are extraordinarily genetically gifted, excuse me, they don't value that gift because it's so easy. So the things that are valued to us are the things that come with effort and struggle and that we've worked for. And I think and in general too, if you go through life without these struggles, and many people do, you see psychological disturbances. You look at the children of celebrities oftentimes, and I've got a couple friends who are psychotherapists, and sometimes it's the kids who grew up where they had everything materialistically they could possibly need, and they're totally screwed up because they didn't have any life struggles. They didn't have any difficulties. Maybe they had emotional neglect and those sorts of things. Like, if you're thinking about like what makes bodybuilding worth it at the end of the day, or what makes, dieting down worth it at the end of the day, sure, if you can diet down with the GLP-1 agonist and it's easy and you get that look that that you want, your dopamine receptor is going to be nice and lit up. You're going to feel great. Your brain's going to feel. You're going to get all the feedback. Oh, you look great, et cetera, et cetera. But the negative, I think, that I don't hear people talking about so much is that the importance of that is now taken from you to a certain degree. It wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a challenge. It was just gifted to you, right? And maybe that's okay for someone who's been obese and really, really struggled. This is what they need. Like, there are certain use cases. So I'm just playing the devil's advocate a little bit here as well.
No.
And the issue, and last thing, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but the last thing that's important too is that, I think at least, is that then the fact that you got there with the GLP-1 agonist was dependent upon that. So let's take the situation where someone could get down and develop the life strategies, the appetite, regulatory strategies to know what foods they can eat, fullness, when they can have a cheat meal, how many they could have, what doesn't trigger them. They literally have become a master of creating a high quality lifestyle that keeps them at a body fat composition or body composition where they look the way they like to look. And they now have like learned all these things, and they have that skill set, which they've earned, right? Yeah. And they can, and along the way, they know all sorts of things. Maybe they become a personal trainer. That's a common path. Compare that then with someone who just quote unquote takes the easy way. They use the GLP-1s, and the reason why their body fat is low, reason why is because the drug is there. They got no skill set. They got nothing. If they run out of that, or they start having, there are no expert here. There's I believe it might have been a thyroid cancer. There's one study suggests that one of the GLP-1s could cause potentially so we don't
a small increase potentially.
Yeah, so those things are somewhat unknown. So let's say you're someone who's susceptible to that, right? And we find this out down the road. Like retatrutide, for instance, is a triple agonist. GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon. Like, that one's like the triple hammer. You going in there, really, you got a lightsaber and you got Thor's hammer, and you got, Iron Man's beams all at once. It's like, there's potential that something could go awry when you're putting a major wrench in the gears of your physiological system. I don't know. We'll see. I don't think that's even approved yet, but people are using it as a research chemical, so to speak. So let's say you end up like, oh shit, I realize this isn't worth it for me, but I spent 5 years in this situation. This happens to people. And it's like, I'm going to have to stop taking this. I don't know how to keep my weight down. I could have if I had been in this other situation, my twin, where they developed that skill set, but now I don't have it. And now you're in a tailspin. It's like your weight climbs back up. You start wearing more clothes. People are like, what's happened to John or Susie? It's like, yeah. And you don't, now you're stuck. And that can create some major self-esteem issues. Like, what the hell happened to me? Do I want to take it again? Do I go into the cycle of using it and not using it and guilt? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm catastrophizing this a little bit. But that's a potential that can happen. And I've seen it happen with steroid users, for instance, where their self-esteem becomes anchored in their physical appearance. And when the day would come, it's like, okay, I'm no longer competing. I'm getting side effects. Does it make sense for me to stay on gear for X number of decades? Whether that is going to impact your health or not, I think that's variable. There are people who've done it for 40, 50 years and lived to a relatively old age. But when they have to come off, they can't do it. So there's a potential dependency, we'll call it at least, that comes with these that you don't think about. Just like with gear, it's like, I just want to be big and I want to put pictures on Instagram and people, to send me arm emojis, right? So that I get this feedback that I'm dying to have. Same thing with, and we're so anchored in our physical bodies as far as our self-esteem. That's just part of the human social hierarchy is that we look at each other. You look at someone, I mentioned this once when I was watching a podcast, but what was the phrase? It's like you're one of the, like the tells, like one of your strongest sort of social suits is your body for many people. If someone walks into a room, not everyone has this prejudice, but if someone walks into a room and they're morbidly obese, people are very often prejudiced. They make judgments about that, right?
Of course, yeah.
You size things up. Same thing if someone comes in, it's like that person looks like he or she might be suffering from anorexia or nervosa. People make judgments. Someone walks in and they're a big meathead, musclehead, bodybuilder.
Wow.
I've experienced this through a lot of my life. It's like people are like, "Oh, let me tell a funny story," and then I'll shut up because it's just related. Kind of lighten it. There was years ago. It was in the summer. I was getting ready for a show. Friend of mine was a personal trainer, and I'd actually, I'm not going to say that, but she knew I was an acupuncturist. She knew I was a good acupuncturist. We'll say it this way, right? And she had a potential client sitting at the desk in the gym where I was training, where she was doing an interaction with her. And I presume this older woman had some health concerns that this friend of mine thought I could address as an acupuncturist. And I had literally just gotten done training. I'm kind of in a hurry. I still had a tank top on. I still was pumped up. I was like almost running because I had to get over to my gym, I think. And my friend says, "Oh, there's Scott right now. Scott, come on over." And this woman turns around and she sees me, and she sees this big vascular, 4-week out bodybuilder. And she just says directly to me, like, "I wouldn't let him touch me with a 10-foot pole." That was the first words out of her mouth. And I'm like, okay. But it wasn't. It's like, I'm like, all right, I'll see you later. Have a good day, you too. And that was it. And I went about my merry way. So, this isn't a sob story about, bodybuilders, but people get sized up and get very attached to having a specific physical form, right? So you get on a GLP-1, and then so much of your life becomes interwoven with becoming that new person, and you've got that one substance, and you got all your eggs in that basket in a certain way. And that's just worth considering, because that's how powerful these drugs can be for people. Like, if you don't take that, who knows what'll happen to your appetite afterwards. I've heard stories of people they just eat like crazy afterwards because they haven't developed all the other things, the skill set, like I mentioned. Anyway, that's, I think, very important to bring to light. The people selling the drugs, and I'm not casting any aspersions and pointing any figures, but they're doctors who prescribe them with good reason when someone's obese and they need this from a health perspective. A doctor's not going to sit down and say, okay, what I'm going to do is prescribe 30 minutes of cardio in the morning. You need to go to the gym 4 times a week. They don't do that, right? They just say, here's your drug, RX, blah, blah, go pick this up at Walgreens. And other people that are suggesting these things, like, they aren't considering you as a human overall. They're looking at it just from this one perspective. And I try to I care about people. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'm saying this. It's like, hey, just so you know, let's get the big picture. This is going to work really, really well. And this is going to be what you're going to depend on. Another crude example, and then I'll shut up, I promise, is, let's say, you need to move around. You're like on your feet with your job, going between buildings. You work in a mall. You're going from store to store. Someone says, hey, there's this mobile wheelchair that you can get, and you'll be able to be 40% more productive in your job. But you got to sit in the wheelchair all the time. You're more productive, but then you can't. You get out of the wheelchair and your legs are atrophied. You got disc atrophy, right? And then without the wheelchair, you're screwed, and you can't go back to what you wanted because you can't hardly walk anymore. That's sort of what's happening. There can be, depending on the person. Some people are they bounce right back. They got no problem. But that is a potential pitfall. And even if it's 1 out of 1,000 persons that might really apply to this catastrophizing scenario that I've painted here, it's worth noting, I think.
I actually think, Scott, that you're on something. And it's something that one of the reasons why I created the GLP-1 protocol that I did is that I remember I had one of my clients, and she had jumped on the GLP-1s. And in the beginning, she was just like kind of ignoring all my advice. I was like, listen, we need to get weight training in. We need to eat chicken. She's like, I'm losing weight. I'm great. You know, there's no problem. I feel great. I feel awesome. My gym. I was like, listen, we need to build these habits because eventually you're coming off of this drug. This is not necessary for you to take for the rest of your life, hopefully. And uh, if you come off, it's going to be hard. And the funny thing is, in the beginning, she stayed on for like, I think it was an 8 week on cycle of the GLP-1s. She lost like 15 pounds. And then she got off, and she'd been with me. She'd done a lot of the exercise. Thank God she kept her muscle on, but she didn't stick to the diet part. When she got off, her weight started going up quickly again. And I was like, listen, now we have to build a diet. And then she's like, I want to go back on. I said, okay, well, one deal between us. If you do go back on, you have to make it difficult for yourself in the sense that you have to choose the foods that you would choose if you were not taking GLP-1s. I said, one, that's a good thing for your health. So if you're eating, lean chicken, vegetables, rice, and like some olive oil on your thing, that's probably going to be better for you than choosing a cheeseburger, generally for your health. And if by doing it, you get used to doing that, becomes your life. You figured out, which restaurants to go to get your chicken breast, rice, and vegetables, what to have in your house ready to eat, what kind of snacks to have around. You'll have built at least a foundation that when you get off, it's not this like huge lifestyle switch. And now you have to go from chicken breast, from like eating half a cheeseburger to trying to eat chicken breast and vegetables. It's, oh, I was doing this. Now I'm a little hungrier and I'm eating a little more chicken, a little more rice, a little more vegetables. And guess what? That's all right. That's fine because you probably won't be in a fat loss phase for that long. You have built the habits, built the lifestyle changes behind it. Because I think if you don't, you run into some problems there.
Did this work with her? Because adherence is really poor with health behaviors in most cases. So do you know, like when she's come off are you guys far enough along to see whether that dietary,
Yeah.
The habit making strategy actually has worked for her?
Yeah, actually, it worked, and she's actually
Good.
she's not working with me coaching wise now. We went through a bunch. We went through like 6 months, and she's been gone now for 2 months. She told me she wants to come back because she has some new goals. But she gained 5 pounds after the GLP-1s only throughout the time. 5 pounds. She's increased her lifts. She has a new PRs on all her major lifts. So everything's moving up in the right place, and like she was like, that's my life now. I don't even think about it. Like I get chicken breast, vegetables. It's like it's so ingrained. It's a pain in the ass to go out of my way to get it. It's like I go for drinks with the girls once in a while, but that's like my night out.
Right. There's an analogy here that occurred to me when I was thinking about what we might chat about between, and I'm getting no expert here, but people that are depressed and you go into therapy simultaneously. And if you have a psychiatrist that would prescribe these things, who would take an antidepressant so that they can have the wherewithal to work through things in therapy, right? And then they've resolved the issues. They've established in a certain way psychological habits, new neurological patterns, ways to view the world. They change their lens, what have you. And then the antidepressant can be removed. And hopefully those thoughts, those habits of thought remain in place. And that's sort of what you've done here. I imagine it works better for some people than others, right? But that's a use case for the GLP-1s, right? And I think maybe I think you kind of intimated this, if ideally would be the GLP-1s will be used alongside the dietary changes that can be sustained, and then you don't have to go back and try to change the diet. You don't have to go back and do a repair job, so to speak, on her diet. She's developed both things at once, and the GLP-1s have been supported the dietary process. So it's not that difficult. They're like training wheels, literally. So you're learning to ride the bike for the first time, the training wheels. And then you take the floaties too. I like that too. And then you learn how to swim. You learn how to ride on your own without those. The thing is that you can get on a bike for the very first time and just start riding, and you can go no hands with you got training wheels on there. You don't have to learn how to balance at all. You could like wobbling back and forth, you won't fall
That's
over.
fine.
As you eat hamburgers and fried chicken or whatever else that is not conducive to weight loss in the least, and you still get away with it. So that's a thing that is going. I think it's going to vary as far as how many people can do. She seems like she was a highly motivated, smart woman. She said, "Okay, I see what you're. I smell what you're cooking. I see what you're putting down here. Let's do this. It makes sense." But that's the thing. It works so well. It's like, why should I change anything? Because I'm just losing weight and I'm eating what I want. This is the best of both worlds, right? And a related thing there too that happens, and this is a little bit finer detail, but this happens when people go in the gym and change their lifestyle. And at first, let's say someone starts off relatively overweight and they feel very insecure going into the gym, right? They feel like everyone's looking at me, and I don't feel like I fit in here, and look how trained all these people are. But then you get in better and better shape, and then it becomes, there's a positive feedback loop that starts to happen where it's like they like going to the gym because they look better and they feel better, right? And so the gym isn't like something they dread, it's something they look forward to. And as long as they're in shape and they're looking good, they will keep going to the gym because it's something they want to do. It's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing. And I think too, when dieting down, just in general, without the GLP-1s necessarily in the picture yet, when people start realizing that, when I don't eat those foods that don't help me lose weight, I start to lose weight. And then they develop an affinity for quote unquote, and taken too far, this has become a disordered eating scenario, but they develop an affinity for eating good, for eating whatever they consider clean or healthy. And they have a disdain or a distaste for, like, I don't want to go and eat a bunch of pizza. Like, it doesn't even really taste that good to me. It tastes okay, but then my stomach's upset. It's like, that's not good. And they don't have any, there's no discipline there anymore. They just do that. And I think that's something now, to get back to the GLP-1s, is developing, ingraining that habit and shifting your lens is something that might not happen as well for someone, because they're getting that positive feedback and they're getting the weight loss that's disconnected with making their own changes in their diet. So they're not the one doing it. It's the third party pharmacological source, right? It's the drug that's creating that. So they don't then ingrain the dietary habits and say, I really like to eat clean. I feel better eating clean. This is my lifestyle. I feel more me. I feel in control. There's numerous things that are happening. So that's a danger. And you had to go back and repair that with her.
Yeah.
And kudos, like you did. It was like, okay, we need to go back and associate body changes that you want with a diet that's commensurate with that, as opposed to body changes that you want with the drug that's commensurate with that. Because the dietary changes are things that are going to be I think overall more healthy for your body. I think if you compare, two people that are lost a certain amount of weight, let's say they're twins, what have you, and one is changed their diet into a very healthy one. Whoops. Compare that with the person who is gotten there just with GLP-1 and they're eating whatever they want, you're going to have a different health scenario potentially. Blood lipids, whatever way you want to look at it.
I think even aesthetically, which is something that people really care about. Like a lot of times I've realized
absolutely.
with clients, like I'll tell them like, oh, your blood lipids are going, and it's like it almost like goes over their head because it's not immediate unless they're having like they're type 2 diabetic or they're having some danger. It's immediate. It's like yeah, whatever. Yeah, my LDL size, sure, whatever. It's like I'll deal with that later. Especially the younger clients I have in their mid 30s and 40s. But when I tell them like you're gonna look worse, like oh, like they'll see me and they'll see like, oh, I had a 6-pack, and they're like, that's awesome. You see how you did the GPL? It's like, yeah, I ate like I was doing a bodybuilding prep the whole time. There's no difference. I would actually force food down my throat because I forced myself to have my protein per day. Like I was eating 1.2 grams per pound of body weight because I was slightly worried about being in a heavy deficit due to the GLP-1s to lose muscle mass. I forced myself to eat 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. That was a lot of protein on the GLP-1.
Right.
There was times I was like, I was like, oh God, I have to like take breaks to eat the food. I'd eat a bit, I have to take a break, I have to come back, try to force a bit more. I felt like I was bulking is what it felt like. I felt like I was bulking and forcing food down. But I was like, I was stringent on it. It was like, it was a job to me. Like I'm forced myself to do this. And that's how I was able to keep most of my muscle during that period. I'm like, I think that's something to develop. And Scott, before we don't go only on this, I want to jump into a couple other things. I want to hear your opinion. I actually heard a podcast with you. You were talking about MK677 as a
Yeah, just a
peptide.
couple weeks ago, a week ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I've never tried MK677, but I was thinking, and this is just purely off of my own logical base. I don't have any information here, but I was just curious. Would MK677 and a GLP-1, obviously this is for people that are really willing to experiment, would recommend for the average people, would combining those be a good cause for a weight cut? Because the MK677 increase your IGF-1, increase your appetite. The GLP-1 cuts your appetite back. You're getting all the extra fat burning of the increased IGF-1, but but your appetite's still staying suppressed, so you're not getting that increased hunger you would get with GH. Would that seem like a stack that might be in the future of bodybuilding somewhere?
In the future of untested bodybuilding, yeah, there's people
Yeah,
already doing
yeah,
that. I'm sure,
exactly.
right? They take the
Yeah,
MK677 during their repeats, that sort of things. Is that something I would I don't ever recommend people take, especially non-prescription drugs. They're getting the black mark. I just give the information. So this is the things that happen. You totally
yeah,
make your own call.
yeah.
Yeah, physiologically, what you said, more IGF-1 in a dieting scenario. The study, this is on the Muscle Minds podcast. Literally, it just came out like 3 or 4 days ago. So
Okay.
people can find that. It's actually linked on my Instagram. Um,
I'll link it
and,
in the description as well.
yeah, yeah. And IGF-1 was higher. So that could potentially be helpful in terms of body composition. There's not a ton of these studies are really pretty old. There's not a lot of research. Um, the thing that was, I think, that was the most interesting to me is that the study with young males, which is going to be the bulk of the population of the listeners, at least here, that would use MK677, the impact on growth hormone. So people who don't know, MK677 it's a growth hormone secretagogue. So it binds to the ghrelin receptor in the brain that causes growth hormone to be released. More growth hormone would then tend to increase IGF-1 too, which is an indicator of total body nitrogen balance, anabolism versus catabolism. More IGF-1 when you're dieting down, as long as you have the caloric deficit in place, is a good thing. That would mean potentially, hypothetically, having more muscle mass. Growth hormone stimulates lipolysis. That's a good thing. And the studies were with older folks and obese people, showing that it can be a powerful growth hormone secretagogue. That's all hunky-dory. The study that I uncovered that I talked about on the podcast was with, I think, 18 to 37-year-old men with no health issues. So in a scenario where they're not expected to have any growth hormone deficiency, like you'll see with older folks or with people with obesity or with people who are dieting down, where at least IGF-1 goes down. Growth hormone, not necessarily. Growth hormone helps with fat liberation. But in those situations where the growth hormone axis is perturbed by age, obesity, or diet, there seems to be something to be had there. Less so in the dieting situation than in the obesity or old age scenario. But in the young, healthy folks, like there was no consistent elevation of growth hormone. And the dose response seemed to show that like 1/5 of the typical dose people use for some
Okay.
people, but not others, was the most powerful dose. Like a fourfold increase in growth hormone secretion over the course of a day. But 1 week into the use. So
Yeah.
people, I'd send people. Maybe you can link it here somehow, so people go see this because I don't want to go through all the details. But
Yeah.
there's lots of caveats with that study, but it basically sort of in terms of the MK677 internet, it broke it in a
Yeah.
certain way
Yeah.
because you're not going to see, like, you can't just take 25 milligrams of that compound, expect you're going to get a growth hormone release. And there's massive desensitization, tachyphylaxis. So the growth hormone release with the first dose is much greater than what you see after repeated doses. So there's a lot to be left unknown there. But So here's the thing, like, I don't know, like, I'm just theorizing because I don't know that I've done a consult with anyone who's combined those two things, but the GLP-1 agonists, or like if you're on retatrutide as well, um, you're going to slow gastric emptying,
Yeah.
right? And you also have an appetite suppressing effect. So one of the issues that happens sometimes with people who, for instance, want to incorporate a refeed or have larger meals is that they have some issues. And you were seeing this, like you could barely get your protein in, right? Because you have an appetite suppressing effect, and you're slowing gastric emptying. And protein tends to be the most satiating, the macronutrients anyway. So now you add in, and the MK677 can cause some massive appetite stimulation in some people. It's variable, right? But it can create that. So now if you've got one drug and the GLP-1s are long acting, it's there, right? It's going to slow your gastric emptying, and that means the food's not going to leave your stomach. It's not going to be absorbed as quickly. And you turn on appetite, you stimulate appetite with something else. Now you put yourself in a pickle, pardon the pun, because now you want to eat more, right? And sure, that would increase your drive to eat. So in your scenario with all the proteins, like, oh, I just don't want to eat this protein. Some of that's central. Some of that is mediated by the slowing of gastric emptying. If you just want to eat more now you're loading food more. If you do give into that, or you do eat more because the central drive is there, now you're gonna end up probably eating more than your GI can really handle, and it could be a recipe for some massive GI distress for some people.
Yeah, I can imagine. I remember I dabble sometimes in marijuana for recreation, and while I was on the GLP-1, I ate an edible marijuana, and I actually was kind of science experimenty about it too. I was really curious, would I get these like munchy feelings? And I did. I did end up getting the munchies, but I did. Luckily, I still was like, I dosed appropriately, so I wasn't completely out of my mind. I ate like enough. When I felt full, I realized, man, if I try to eat more, I'm gonna feel really uncomfortable, like a Thanksgiving dinner. Like I'm gonna be like, I can't move around, and I stopped. But I can easily see somebody a little less in tune with their body being like, man, I could do it more, and get like another 2, 3 bites, and then just be like, oh my god, what did I do to myself? I now you're
Yeah.
laughing bad.
So there are people. I would imagine. I don't know. Maybe there's some data out there on this, but I would imagine that it's at least a common scenario with GLP-1 agonist users that they find this very effective because they may already have a quote unquote poor relationship with food. Food is comforting for them. They're the person who might be like, they had a squabble with their boyfriend, or they broke up, and they go and then they do a quart or 2 quarts of Haagen-Dazs or Ben and Jerry's, that sort of thing. So there are individuals that have, because of that distorted relationship with food, eat to comfort, eat because it feels good, it tastes good. Their reward centers are lit up by food differently than other people. So, and those people then, if they can just reduce their appetite overall, that would then shift everything down, and the using food as a reward may be less prevalent for them, less common occurrence, so that helps them lose weight. But then for those individuals, and this is like total armchair, wild ass guess theorizing here, but for those individuals, if you use MK677 or someone like, I've known bodybuilders, like as far as gaining size, Kai Green's a famous example of this, right? Yeah. There's some videos. There's a video of him, I think, when he was on the way back from the Australian Pro one year, and he's at a Denny's, maybe in Australia if they have Denny's there, or maybe it's when he got back, and he orders, like, he's sitting in a booth by himself, and he orders, enough food to cover the entire table, and he eats it all.
Video of him doing this.
Yeah, like he could eat a lot. Like there's some people who just have the tremendous capability to eat food. So if you take someone like that, or who has a sort of a shifted appetite, satiety relationship, because that's just their genetic predisposition, or someone for whatever psychological reasons tends to use food as a way to comfort, and then add MK677 on that, right? You may have runaway appetite with the GI that can't keep pace. And then you got so you could have some major issues. But the devil's in the dose, and that was one of the things that I was, hoping to convey in that podcast about MK677 too, is that this 25 milligram dose is the one that's been used since studies in the 90s. They've just been using that dose. That's the dose they use. So there's a scientifically having that continuity is advantageous. You can compare studies. They use the same dose. It's not something that's variable that could be a reason for different effects with different populations, let's say. But luckily in this study with the healthy individuals, they compared a 5 milligram dose versus a 25 milligram dose. And for some of those, and they listed all like 9 subjects, so you could see what their values were after a week of a placebo, 5 and 25 milligrams. For some of those individuals, 25 milligrams wasn't effective at all after a week. They were completely desensitized. But 5 milligrams, maybe because that was enough to create the stimulation in them, but wasn't such an oversaturating dose, quote unquote oversaturated or saturating dose with a prolonged half-life because of the larger amount. The liver has to process this. So there's potentially some liver toxicity that comes with MK677. But this smaller dose didn't seem to create, they don't know, they didn't make multiple measurements to see this, but 1 week in, they're still getting significant GH release. So that could be a scenario where if someone says, I'm going to use, the devil's in the dose, I'm going to use a smaller dose, and you'd have to do growth hormone measurements to know this. We're getting in the weeds now a little bit. But if you're one of those people who is in that scenario where the small dose is more effective than the large dose, that would mean potentially also, and didn't measure it in the study that I recall, less appetite. So in that scenario where you've got a smaller dose that increases growth hormone, potentially increases IGF-1 because you're dieting. This study that I'm talking about, they weren't dieting. This was just eucaloric. There's no dietary intervention here. And you don't have the appetite issue, right? That could actually be a good thing because you're getting more growth hormone, which would then help with fat loss potentially. Or maybe you have some neutralizing of appetite in someone who, with the dose of GLPs, their appetite tends to be too low, right? So it brings it back to where they have at least a reasonable amount of appetite, so they don't just say, well, shit, I don't got to eat anything today. And each day I get up and the scale's 2 pounds lighter. This is awesome. Like, no, that's way too fast. Way too fast. So, but the danger, and immediately when I say that, I'm like, then we're getting to a polypharmacy situation. Now you've not only got training wheels, you've got training wheels and you got floaties on, right? You got support going all around. And is that the right way to go about this for the long run? For your own building your own resilience and building the things that create quality of life is like, I went to hell and back and I'm so glad I did it because I'm better because of it. As opposed to, I got in this fireproof space capsule, went down to hell and I looked out the window and like, oh, there's the devil and the Hades and everything else. And then I came back. It's like, but you didn't experience hell. You just looked at it. The drugs took you that place and you didn't develop any resistance to fire. You didn't develop any resistance and resilience to life's difficulties. So adding more drugs, let me say this because I've harped on this, but there's also a scenario where someone is sort of a bodybuilding cybernaut, right? Yeah. And they're maybe like they're a tinkerer, right? And they're like the guy who's got a car in his garage that he just loves to work on, and he wants to make that thing faster. And what he does is he because he's totally inside, he's not scared of the pain, the difficulty. He wants to learn and apply everything he possibly can. And he's willing to do the experiments that are difficult, the experiments that aren't that difficult, because he's looking to optimize the end result in some way, shape, or form. And that journey is intrinsically valuable to him. So that person says, you know what? If I use a smaller amount of GLP-1, I seem to have better effects. I'm still hungry a little bit perhaps, but I'm not so hungry that I'm stressed. Maybe my cortisol levels are lower. I don't have the protein breakdown. I hold on to muscle better as I diet down, or have a better protein balance all in all. That makes I end up being better on stage. That person isn't just trying to journey down to hell. They're looking for back doors into hell and ways
Yeah.
to skirt around and avoid the radar of the devil so that they don't get caught, right? That's
Yeah.
someone who's the cybernaut looking for the hacks and on this exploratory journey that makes and is developing the skills of, wow, how can I optimize things in my life? And I am completely integrated in this journey that I'm there, as opposed to, I don't want to have to do any work. Just tell me what to do. Tell me which drugs to take so it can be as easy as possible. So the use of the pharmaceuticals, let's say, on the surface in those two scenarios could be the same dose, right? But with totally different intent and a psychological viewpoint on doing so. And I think just being aware of that, like, where do you fall? There's no right or wrong, right? Some people just want to get there. They're the high-end business people. Just tell me what to do so I can get there. This isn't my journey. I'm not worried about, trying to figure out these subtleties. That's what I'm paying you for. I do that in my job and elsewhere in my life. I'm trying to be a father. I'm trying to be a mother, what have you. So, but just being aware of where you're coming at those things and what the dangers and the pitfalls are, I think is super important, because GLP-1, like we talked about, there's some potential issues that could befall some people, not all, but some, depending on the viewpoint they're using or they're taking on when they use them.
Well, I think, Scott, actually, I want to say something, because to wrap up, mostly for the podcast, because we're unfortunately, I wish I could say it longer, but
You
I
gotta
do want
go.
to say
Yeah,
that.
I gotta go in a bit too.
Yeah. So, but I think what we covered a lot today, and I think one thing that we covered that I think is super important, could be a take home for anyone that listened and got this far into the podcast. If you have, thank you, and I appreciate it, because Scott's dropped a whole bunch of knowledge for us here. Is yeah, it's on a spectrum, right? There is, you could be, if you're just trying to skip all the hardships and make this just as easy as possible, you're probably, by using any drugs, even if that's testosterone, if that's any other drugs, any kind of performance enhancers, if you're doing it just to skip the line of difficulty, you're probably missing out on a lot of the psychological benefits of getting to that point. If you're using it to either get started, or because you're pushing so hard in another area of life that you can't focus on this, but you still want the health benefits of this, health and social benefits of it, but you're putting it out again, you're getting into the fire, you're building that skin somewhere else in the game. That's different. It's a spectrum of where you are, and I think being honest with yourself with why and how am I trying to do this, and what's the point, and being intentional. I do this with people I take testosterone, because I have a lot of people, especially now everyone's talking about GLP-1s, but a couple years ago everyone was trying to get on testosterone, and I was like, if you guys think you're going to shoot this needle in your ass and then everything's going to be easy. It's not. You still got to put in the work. You still got to, everything we're doing. It's just going to be better. You're going to be faster. You might feel better, and there are going to be some consequences. Like when you do come, if you do eventually want to come off of this, it's going to be a process. And even if your endocrine system feels good, your dopamine receptors might not. You might never feel as good as you were on those higher doses of testosterone. You got to accept these downsides of what you're doing. It's not a miracle cure all. There's a spectrum of why you're doing it. What's the reason? What's your ideas behind it? And I think that's the general outline of this entire podcast and the point that you're driving home. Am I on point there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. It's just knowledge is power, right? And another phrase popped in my head: better living through chemistry, right?
Yeah.
And the question are you actually living for everyone what better living means is different. For some
Yeah.
people, it's like, I just gotta get lean. These are the things I have to do. That's a better life for them. So you have to answer that question for yourself. And I think one of the main takeaways, another way of phrasing it is it's worthwhile to ask yourself those questions and be honest with yourself. And if you say, you know what, I'm just going to take this drug because it's something I got to do. I got kids to take care of. I got other things to do. I've got a million other things. This needs to happen. And it's the right way for me to improve my life. Boom, do it. If you're just stepping away and running away from life's challenges and you're just being avoidant, and that really all in all is a pattern that you've seen that doesn't make your life better, that's not better living through chemistry. That's just a dysfunctional coping strategy, perhaps, so to speak. So just ask yourself those questions. Am I living better all in all? If I'm honest with myself, if I could be a third person and say, hey, what is the best for you in the long run to do? And this is a question you can ask a coach too. That's it. Just be honest with know thyself. Like that's like one of the most important things I think that that can be asked is what I'm doing allowing me to actually know myself better, or am I running away from myself to some degree? And if you can answer that question honestly, and the question can change day by day, year by year, and if you just ask that question, I think you're on the right track to living a better life.
Scott, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for diving in deep with me on this, and you gave me a lot to think about too. I think I'm going to add that into when I'm dealing with clients. I'm going to have them answer that question to me whenever they do decide, if they are going to decide to come and jump on GLP-1s and they want to go that route, or any other medication pharmacological decision. I'm going to have them answer okay, really, I asked them already why, but I'm gonna get a little more in depth because I think that could be super beneficial, and I think long term that will give them more motivation, whatever they do decide to do it correctly. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time, guys. I'm going
You're
to
welcome.
link all of Scott's stuff. I highly recommend it. And if you really want to get like nerdy into this, like Scott stuff goes deep. I love it, and I highly recommend it. I learned a ton from Scott. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, man. I enjoyed this talk. It was cool.
I appreciate it. But, oh, there you go.